$4.15. That's what you're paying for a gallon of gas right now, and if that number doesn't make your stomach turn, you probably haven't filled up a tank lately. I remember when crossing $3 felt like a gut punch. Now we blew past that months ago, and nobody in Washington seems to be losing sleep over it. The Bureau of Labor Statistics just dropped the April CPI numbers, and year-over-year inflation came in at 3.8%. But here's the thing most people missed in the headlines. The market consensus for May, which we're about to get on June 10th, is 4.2%. Let that sink in. We're not trending down. We're accelerating. And the reasons behind it are more tangled than most talking heads on cable news want to admit. I'm Kunal, and through failed finance, I've spent years breaking down how money really works in this country. Not the textbook version, the version that hits your bank account, your grocery bill, your rent check. So let me walk you through what's actually happening, why it matters way more than the number itself, and what it means for your wallet over the next 6 to 12 months. The core driver right now. And I mean the single biggest reason your cost of living is climbing is energy. Crude oil has been on a tear since tensions in the Middle East escalated near the Strait of Hormuz earlier this year. When a major shipping choke point gets threatened, insurance premiums on tankers spike, supply routes get rerouted, and all of that cost trickles straight down to the refinery and then to the pump. In April alone, energy prices jumped 3.8% month over month and a staggering 17.9% year over year. Gasoline specifically? Up 28.4% compared to last year. That's not a blip. That's a structural shift in how much it costs to move goods, commute to work, heat your home. And here's what a lot of folks don't connect. When diesel gets expensive, every single thing you buy at Walmart, Target, or your local grocery store gets more expensive too, because trucks run on diesel. The farmer in Iowa doesn't eat that cost. The distributor in Ohio doesn't eat it. You eat it. Every time you scan your items at checkout, you're paying a hidden energy tax that nobody voted for. Now, some analysts are arguing this is transitory. That word again, right? We heard it in 2021, we heard it in 2022, and it turned out to be anything but transitory back then. The argument goes like this. If the Hormuz situation stabilizes, oil drops, headline CPI drops, and the Fed can relax. Maybe. But I want you to look at the other side of the ledger. Core CPI. That's inflation stripped of food and energy, the number the Federal Reserve actually obsesses over, rose 2.8% year over year in April, up from 2.6% in March. Core is climbing too. Services inflation hit 3.5%. Shelter costs, which is the single largest chunk of most Americans' budgets, rose 0.6% in just 1 month. That's not oil. That's not some geopolitical crisis halfway around the world. That's your landlord raising rent. That's homeowners' insurance going up. That's the cost of a doctor's visit creeping higher. When core inflation is broadening like this, you can't just wave it away as an energy shock. Something deeper is going on in the economy, and it's the part that should genuinely concern you. Think about what the Federal Reserve is staring at right now. They've got a meeting on June 16th and 17th, and the May CPI print dropping the day before is going to land on that conference table like a grenade. If it comes in at 4.2% or higher, the pressure to hike rates again becomes almost impossible to resist. And rate hikes in this environment are a double-edged sword that cuts deep on both sides. Raise rates and you make mortgages more expensive. The average 30-year fixed is already north of 7%. You make car loans brutal, you make credit card debt even more punishing for the millions of Americans already carrying balances. But don't raise rates and you risk letting inflation expectations become unanchored, which is economists speak for people starting to believe prices will just keep rising forever. So they demand higher wages, companies pass those wages on as higher prices, and you get a self-fulfilling spiral that's incredibly hard to break. Warren Buffett said something years ago that I keep coming back to. Inflation is a far more devastating tax than anything that has been enacted by our legislatures. He called it a tax because it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're a CEO or a cashier. It erodes purchasing power across the board, but it hits hardest at the bottom because a lower-income family spends a far greater percentage of their income on essentials: food, gas, rent. The exact categories climbing fastest right now. Buffett learned this firsthand during the 1970s and early 80s when inflation ran rampant and he had to completely rethink how Berkshire Hathaway allocated capital. He pivoted toward companies with pricing power, businesses that could raise their own prices without losing customers, and avoided capital-intensive businesses that needed constant reinvestment at inflated costs. That insight is just as relevant for you and me in 2026 as it was 50 years ago, and I'll get into the practical side of that in a minute. Here's something I want you to consider that almost nobody is talking about. The labor market is still running hot. Non-farm payrolls have been robust, unemployment is historically low, and wage growth, while it sounds like a good thing, is actually feeding into the inflation problem. When employers have to pay more to attract workers, they raise prices to protect margins. When workers see prices going up, they demand even higher wages. It's a feedback loop, and the Fed is caught in the middle trying to cool it without triggering a recession. And the recession question. Let's not dance around it. Is one coming? Honestly, nobody knows for certain, and anyone who tells you they do is selling something. But the yield curve has been flashing warning signals, consumer confidence surveys are weakening, and credit card delinquencies are ticking up. Those are the early tremors. They don't guarantee an earthquake, but they tell you the ground isn't as stable as the stock market's recent rally might suggest. Speaking of the stock market, if this May CPI comes in hot, expect growth stocks to take a hit. Higher inflation means higher rate expectations, which means the future earnings of tech companies and high-growth names get discounted more heavily. The dollar could strengthen as rate hike bets increase, which sounds good until you realize a strong dollar makes American exports less competitive and squeezes multinational earnings. Gold, which people love to call an inflation hedge, might actually drop short-term because higher real yields make non-yielding assets less attractive. It's counterintuitive, but markets are counterintuitive. That's kind of their whole thing. I want to hear from you on this. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you personally changed how you spend money in the last 6 months because of rising prices? Switched grocery stores? Cut back on eating out? Started driving less? I read the comments, and the stories people share are often more telling than any government data release. Your lived experience is real data, and I think there's value in us comparing notes. Now let's talk about what you can actually do. The first instinct most people have when they hear inflation is rising is to panic, and panic leads to bad decisions. Pulling money out of the market, hoarding cash, making emotional moves. Don't. Cash is actually the worst place to park your money during high inflation because it's guaranteed to lose purchasing power. If inflation is running at 4.2% and your savings account pays 1%, you're losing over 3% in real terms every single year. Instead, think about where your money is working. High-yield savings accounts and short-term treasury bills are paying around 5% right now, which at least keeps you roughly even with inflation. I-bonds, which are pegged to CPI, are another tool worth considering, though the purchase limits are capped. On the investment side, look at sectors that historically perform well during inflationary periods. Energy companies that benefit from high oil prices, utilities with regulated pricing power, consumer staples that people buy regardless of economic conditions. Real estate investment trusts with strong lease structures can also pass inflation through to tenants, though you want to be selective because commercial real estate is facing its own set of headaches with office vacancies. And this isn't financial advice. I'm not your advisor. I don't know your specific situation, your risk tolerance, your timeline. But I am saying that doing nothing and hoping inflation goes away is a strategy that has never worked in the history of the American economy. You have to be proactive. You have to understand the environment and position yourself accordingly, even if the moves feel small or incremental. The people who come out of inflationary periods stronger are the ones who adjusted early, not the ones who waited until the damage was already done. So let's pick up right where the rubber meets the road, because understanding inflation intellectually is one thing. Feeling it in your daily life and knowing how to respond is something else entirely. One thing that keeps nagging at me is how the conversation around the Fed's next move completely ignores the fiscal side of the equation. Everyone's laser-focused on Jerome Powell and what the Federal Open Market Committee will do on June 17th, but monetary policy is only half the story. The federal government is running massive deficits. The national debt just crossed $36 trillion. When the government borrows that aggressively and spends at that scale, it pumps money into the economy. And more money chasing the same amount of goods is literally the textbook definition of inflation. The Fed can raise rates all day long, but if Congress keeps spending like there's no tomorrow, you're essentially pressing the gas and the brake at the same time. The car doesn't stop. It just burns through the brake pads faster. And guess who pays for new brake pads? You do. Through higher taxes, reduced services, or the silent theft of inflation eating away at every dollar you've saved. This is something I think a lot of Americans intuitively feel but can't quite articulate. The system seems rigged against savers, and in a way, it is. When real interest rates are negative, meaning the interest you earn on your savings is lower than inflation, the government is effectively transferring wealth from savers to borrowers. And who's the biggest borrower in the country? The federal government itself. It's a quiet redistribution that never makes the evening news. Now, let me bring this across the Atlantic for a second because what's happening in Europe actually matters for your portfolio here at home. The European Central Bank is almost certainly going to hike rates at their June 10th to 11 meeting. Eurozone inflation hit 3.2% in May, with energy costs surging nearly 11% year over year. When both the Fed and the ECB are tightening at the same time, global liquidity contracts. That affects everything: emerging market debt, commodity prices, corporate bond spreads. If you own international funds or have exposure to foreign equities, this synchronized tightening cycle is a headwind you need to account for. It's not just an American problem anymore. Inflation is a global phenomenon right now, driven by the same interconnected forces. Energy supply shocks from the Middle East, persistent supply chain friction from the US-China semiconductor decoupling, and lingering fiscal stimulus that was pumped into economies during the pandemic era that still hasn't fully washed through the system. Let me tell you about a guy I know. Let's call him Dave, who lives outside of Dallas. Dave's a project manager, makes about $85,000 a year, solid middle-class income. 2 years ago, his family's monthly budget had about $600 of breathing room after all the bills were paid. That's not luxury money, that's the cushion that lets you sleep at night. Today, that cushion is gone. His mortgage payment didn't change because he locked in a fixed rate, but everything else did. Groceries went from around $800 a month to over $1,100. Gas for 2 cars went from $250 to nearly $400. His homeowner's insurance jumped 22% after a string of severe weather claims in Texas. His wife's health insurance premium went up at open enrollment, and his kids' school supplies, extracurriculars, clothing, all of it crept up just enough that the math doesn't work anymore. Dave didn't get poorer on paper. His salary actually went up 3% last year. But in real terms, in terms of what his money can actually buy, he's worse off than he was in 2024. That's what 4.2% inflation looks like when it's not a number on a screen, but a family trying to figure out whether they can afford summer camp this year. And Dave's story isn't unusual. It's the norm. A recent Federal Reserve survey found that nearly 40% of Americans would struggle to cover an unexpected $400 expense. Think about that in the context of rising prices across every major spending category. The margin for error in millions of households has basically disappeared. One car repair, one medical bill, one appliance breaking down, and people are reaching for the credit card. And credit card interest rates right now are averaging over 22%. That's not a safety net, that's a trap. You swipe the card to cover today's shortfall, and you create tomorrow's bigger shortfall plus interest. This is the cycle that keeps people stuck, and it's accelerating. So what does a smart financial response look like when you're not sitting on a pile of cash? First, and I can't stress this enough, audit your subscriptions and recurring charges. The average American household is paying for over $200 a month in subscriptions they don't actively use or don't even remember signing up for. Streaming services, app memberships, gym passes, cloud storage upgrades, that premium Spotify plan you share with nobody. Canceling even half of those frees up real money that can go toward building an emergency fund or paying down high-interest debt. Second, rethink your relationship with debt. If you're carrying credit card balances, look into balance transfer cards with 0% introductory APR periods. Some of them still offer 15 to 18 months of interest-free time, and that window can save you hundreds of dollars that would otherwise go straight to the bank. If you've got federal student loans, check whether your repayment plan is optimized. The Save Plan adjustments that rolled out could lower your monthly payments significantly depending on your income. Third, and this is where most people freeze up, start investing even small amounts. There's a psychological barrier where people think investing is only for the wealthy or only makes sense with large sums. That's dead wrong. If you put $50 a week into a broad market index fund and the market returns its historical average of around 10% annually, you're looking at roughly $45,000 in 10 years. That's not life-changing wealth, but it's a real buffer, and it's infinitely better than letting that $50 sit in a checking account where inflation devours it. The S&P 500 has survived every inflationary period in American history. The 40s, the 70s, the early 80s, 2022, and come out the other side higher. Time in the market beats timing the market. That's not a cliche. It's a mathematical reality backed by over a century of data. I also want to flag something that's flying under the radar: the I-bond fixed rate component. Right now, I-bonds are offering a composite rate that adjusts with CPI, and while the purchase limit is $10,000 per person per year through Treasury Direct, that's still $10,000 earning a rate that directly tracks inflation with zero credit risk because it's backed by the full faith of the US government. For money you don't need for at least a year, since there's a 12-month lockup. It's one of the most straightforward inflation hedges available to ordinary people. No brokerage account needed, no complicated options, strategies, just a direct purchase from the Treasury. Have you done this? If you have, tell me in the comments how the process went for you, because I think a lot of people are intimidated by the Treasury Direct website and just never follow through. Let me circle back to the bigger picture because I don't want to leave you with the impression that this is all doom and gloom. America has been through worse, way worse. In 1980, inflation hit 14.8%. Paul Volcker at the Fed jacked interest rates above 20% and deliberately triggered a recession to kill it. It was brutal. Unemployment hit nearly 11%, but it worked. Inflation collapsed, and the economy entered one of the longest expansions in history. We're nowhere near that severity right now. 4.2% is uncomfortable, it's painful for working families, and it demands a serious policy response. But it's manageable. The question is whether our current leaders, at the Fed and in Congress, have the discipline to make unpopular choices. Rate hikes hurt, spending cuts hurt, but letting inflation run hurts worse because it compounds. Every month that prices rise faster than wages, the damage accumulates. And unlike a recession, which has a beginning and an end, unchecked inflation can grind on for years, slowly eroding the standard of living for an entire generation. That's not alarmism, that's history. The final thing I'll leave you with is this: your financial literacy is your best defense. Not the government, not the Fed, not some guru on social media promising to 10x your money. Understanding how inflation works, how interest rates affect your borrowing costs, how to allocate your savings across different asset classes based on the current environment. That knowledge compounds just like interest does, and it's free. Everything I share here on Failed Finance is built around that idea, making complex financial concepts accessible so you can make better decisions for yourself and your family. If this breakdown helped you see the inflation picture more clearly, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because the June CPI drop and the Fed decision are going to be two of the most important financial events of the year, and I'll be breaking both of them down in real time. Stay sharp out there.